Hi guys, so welcome to this EAPI video focusing on the evaluative and theory comments, specific looking at the psychology theory comments that we can put into this really tricky bit of coursework that we know is 15% of the course and so many people find difficult, even some teachers find it difficult to get their head round. So we're going to look at this bit. I'm going to make suggestions for the strengths and weaknesses and the development plan, and as always, like and subscribe. I'll be doing another video in terms of the physiology and social and cultural, so watch out for that. So let's look at the basics. You should know really that there is a prescribed theory content that you can include in your EAPI, and what that means is there are some topics that we absolutely cannot mention, will gain no credit whatsoever for bringing them into our EAPI, and there are some topics that very much we will be given credit for, so we have to hone in on the topics that we are going to get credit for. So nice and quickly, I'll just flick through rather than reading these out. We've got the skill classification sections we can get credit for. We then, if my video will move on. There we go. We then have some of the sports psychology sections that we can also gain credit for, and some more here, so goal setting and self-efficacy. So we've got to make sure that all our information comes from these evaluative prescribed comments. So first off, I'm going to start with the strengths and weaknesses section. So I'm going to suggest to you what you might include in your strengths and weaknesses in terms of psychology material. That doesn't mean to say that this is what you should include, or you can absolutely use any of these topics if you prefer in the development plan. But one key thing we need to remember, say for example, this first one that I've got here, skill classification, if we mention this and we look to apply our knowledge to our strengths and weaknesses section, we don't duplicate that same topic in the development plan because we're going to gain no extra credit for it. So almost once we've ticked off one of the theory topics, we shouldn't come back to it whatsoever. So I'm going to start off really kind of at a basic level, to be honest, because I don't know what sort of students you're teaching or what sort of in-depth knowledge you know your sport and you understand the spec. So what we could possibly bring into the strengths and weaknesses section, easy one, skill classification. So justify the skill that you have brought to light on the skill classification continuum. So for example, the performer's rugby tackling is very strong, and I would explain why from what's in from the video. Tackling is an externally paced, gross and complex skill. Personality-wise, justifying one tactical strength or weakness in relation to the player's personality. So this time I'm going to look at football. Okay, if I was watching a football video. So you can see from the video that the centre-back's communication is very strong, consistently shouting, time, man on. Obviously, I've got to adjust that depending on what I see. This might suggest the performer is an extrovert personality with a lower reticular activating system, therefore seeking that external stimulation. Or I might relate it to a type A personality, needing to be in control of the environment and highly competitive. So one or the other there. Lastly, in terms of the basics, I might include the arousal topics. So justify one of their strengths and weaknesses in relation to one of the arousal theories, so either drive, inverted U and catastrophe theory. So perhaps in the first couple of minutes of the video, the netballer's overhead passes were weak, and I would explain why. This might be because they are possibly over-aroused or experiencing over-arousal. They are not in the optimal point of arousal according to inverted U theory. Now, a better candidate might go on to apply this or justify this more. They might be able to relate it to what is going on in the match play, but again, I thought I'd start off nice and simple. For the following few slides, I'm not going to include a clear example because so many students want to be spoon-fed, and that's not the case, and it can't be the case. And as we know, we can't go into our EAPI almost having prepared a script. It's not going to work like that. You know, you can sniff a script out a mile off and you're just going to get penalised and be pulled down for that. And ultimately, that's malpractice. So for the next few ones, I'm just going to give you suggestions, and it's up to you to go away and decide how this might fit into your EAPI. So again, looking at the strengths and weaknesses, we might be able to include either social facilitation or social inhibition. So suggest that one of their strengths or weaknesses could be explained through facilitation or inhibition. And again, we've got those almost characteristics that affect social inhibition. For example, you might be able to spot whether they are home or away. You, again, might link this to personality. You might look at the proximity of the crowd. Is there a crowd? What stage of learning are they in? Again, we can adapt that and apply it for what we've got in the video. Looking at anxiety then, suggest one of their strengths or weaknesses could be explained through the zone of optimal functioning. We might say that they look like they're having fun, or that they look relaxed, or they seem completely in control of their movements. Again, whatever's relevant. And we could potentially relate this to cognitive or somatic anxiety. We could look at aggression. Now, you may be watching a performance whereby, particularly in a team environment, you might see clear aggression, or we can look at assertion and then look at one of those growth skills being linked to one of the theories of aggression. You should know this really, but instinct theory, cue, frustration, aggression hypothesis, or social learning theory. So again, depends on what you see in the video in front of you. Now moving on to the development plan. So I've tried to balance out my suggestions, because probably one of the major things where people or students go wrong is they put way too many evaluative comments, almost lump it in with the strengths and weaknesses, and we need a clear balance between both sections. So where it's going to be generally easy to bring in some of the more psychological units, looking at the types or method of practice. So when you introduce one of your progressive practices, link it to the knowledge of your practice types, methods. You might be looking at massed, fixed, distributed. You might be looking at a whole approach. You might be looking at breaking it down to subroutines, and highlight one advantage of this practice to your performer. Do they need to build a confidence? Do they need to build up kinesthetic awareness? Whatever it may be. You could go to town on this. Again, really important that if we're going to go into the realm of learning theories, we're only going to get credit for bringing one to the table. There's no point in talking about every learning theory there is. So maybe during your development program, you're going to be looking at introducing rewards. You might link this to operant conditioning. You might decide you're looking at a skill and you either want to groove a new SR bond, or even first and foremost, you might need to weaken an SR bond, and you can link that to Thorndike, of course. Is there an appropriate point where you might have a role model, someone doing a demonstration, and therefore we can link that to social learning theory? Stages of learning, when appropriate, highlight the performers in the associative stage, maybe a couple of characteristics, and I've put a challenge task on there. Guidance, when appropriate, again, dead easy, linked to either visual, verbal, manual, mechanical, give an advantage for this, or why you might include this guidance type at this point in the development plan, again, to really apply that knowledge and your understanding. Next of all, you've got feedback. Maybe you want to bring in at the appropriate point, positive, negative, extrinsic, intrinsic, knowledge of performance, knowledge of results. Why are you going to do this for your performer? Could you potentially explain how almost the immediacy of this is really important, or how it's encouraging to make sure they look at their own intrinsic feedback to develop that intrinsic nature or avoid information overload? Motivation, are you going to be looking at exploring extrinsic, intrinsic motivation? Does that change as you go through? And although nowadays, as the spec has changed, we don't have to look at a test at the start of the development program as maybe we once did, there's no harm in talking about SMART goals. The fear here is that we might get a student who then might go through S, M, A, R, T one by one. And of course that would eat into a lot of time, a lot of capacity in terms of what we need to remember. And then that's just not necessary. So could you link to one aspect of the goal setting and then link to one area of SMART, or even the importance of goal setting perhaps? I've left these two till last. Maybe they're a bit more complex to bring in. Certainly I think about my students, probably only the more academic students that really understand these topics are going to be bringing these in. So self-confidence and self-efficacy. So could it be that one of your performers' weaknesses that you've prioritised, might they have low self-efficacy towards this skill or this particular tactical element, and therefore can we use one of Bandora's ways, maybe give them loads of verbal persuasion or social persuasion, encouraging them. Again, I give examples of what that would look like depending on what I was looking at in terms of the video. And then lastly, in the development program or the development plan, a suggestion that you could bring in attitudes. Maybe there could relate to the triadic model. Maybe you feel that they could have a bad attitude towards training or hydration, or you could link it in with ergogenic aids perhaps, and therefore the way of changing an attitude, either persuasive communication, or you could show off and do cognitive dissonance if you really understand that. So again, like just some suggestions for you, because people really, really struggle to know where to bring in these evaluative comments. Now, there'll be a lot of other things that you could, of course, apply and make sure they're on that prescribed list. Other things you need to consider. You are only going to get credit for your application of these theory comments. We don't want definitions. You don't want to just state the theory, because you're going to get marked down, and certainly moderated down if you do that. I've mentioned this once already, but you really need to balance out the amount of theory that you put in your strengths and weaknesses and your development plan. All the time we see students going crazy on one side or the other. I've even seen students believing that they need to do all the physiology and the strengths and weaknesses and all the psychology development plan. No, that's not the case. We need to balance it out. Sometimes students want a set number on this. Again, like, we're not pre-planning this, we're not preparing a script, so you have to go with what you have seen on the video in the moment. And the best way to do this, if you're practicing sort of justifying what you see, whether it be watching sport or watching television, maybe you're watching Sky Sports News, maybe the FA Cup is on, constantly try to link what you're watching to your A-level PE topics. And therefore, when you get to the EAPI, this will come so much more naturally for you, and you will be able to speak so much more confidently about what you have seen on this video that you are going to watch. Once again, nice and quick, nice and concise, because I know people don't want to spend hours and hours watching YouTube videos, of course. Go back now and make notes, cherry pick what you liked, go and look at the bits that most maybe resonate with you or most make sense to the sort of performer that you're likely to watch. Go and watch the next video on social cultural evaluative comments or the physiology ones, and of course like and subscribe. Good luck, because I know this is a really difficult aspect of the course. Many people struggle with it, so I hope you found something useful there.